What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, November 29th, 2017. And if you're wondering why the sound is not what you normally expect, Spectrum is still behaving very poorly here in Hawaii. So we're doing the radio show over the phone lines. And while we work out some solutions, and John Stadmiller called me earlier today. They're working on a couple of solutions there. I'm working on a couple of solutions out here as well. Obviously, because I can't route this phone through my regular audio mixer, we're not doing BAMuser. And BAMuser has notified me that they are getting out of the video streaming business. They're now catering business to business at greatly increased prices, and I can't. So we're looking for a solution to that. But first, we've got to fix the bandwidth problem, find out what's going on with Spectrum. And just as an experiment today, I did type Spectrum sucks into a search engine, and boy, did I get all these pages about just how terrible the service is. Again, going back to downdetector.com, all these complaints coming in. People are actually having their businesses suffer harm because their internet has become unreliable. It's become very, very slow. Now, New York did, in fact, sue Comcast, Charter Communications, Spectrum, whatever name they were going by, for failing to deliver the bandwidth that was advertised. And I guess it was a false advertising lawsuit. We need to get that going in all, the 49 other states, because this is absolutely unacceptable for a company to promise you a certain degree of performance, take your money, and then fail to deliver consistently. So I'm a little angry and upset about it, but we are going to soldier on here using the regular phone line. So today is Wednesday, November 29th, 2017, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another crazy weekend here. And phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We can still take phone calls and have our little discussion. Now, this whole sexual misconduct thing has spun completely out of control, and people's lives are being ruined over mere allegations. And apparently NBC just fired Matt Lauer over a sexual misconduct allegations. The only complaint that's ever been filed against him in his 20 years, but they said, oh, we got to take this seriously. No proof, no evidence, and they fired him. Same thing with Garrison Keillor. Now, he used to be the host of a Prairie Home Companion, for those of you who listen to that, and he's been fired by Minnesota Public Radio over allegations of improper behavior. Same through Jeffrey Rush, the actor, has been accused of inappropriate behavior. Now, maybe something happened and maybe it didn't, but until you know for a fact, you shouldn't just be firing people and wrecking their lives, especially given the number of false claims of sexual harassment that we're seeing emerge from the current brouhaha around Judge Roy Moore. So we have to be very careful. An allegation is not proof. An allegation is not a conviction. And we do know there are people who will make these allegations to boost their careers, to get rid of a competitor, to maybe extort some hush money, or just revenge for some imagined slight. So it is getting out of control. Now, over at Project Veritas, they have scored again with their hidden video cameras, and apparently this Washington Post reporter was caught on tape admitting this story about Trump and Russia it is just nonsense. And he's saying maybe it doesn't even exist because there's nothing there. Meanwhile, a 12-page protocol agreement between the governments of the United States and Russia concerning the management and disposition of plutonium bears former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's signature and dovetails several other agreements made in August and September of 2000. Now, that's going back a long ways, and I guess it was assumed that Bill and Hillary Clinton presumed that President Gore would cover for them as they move forward on this deal to sell control over 1/5 of our uranium to Rosatom. And then, of course, there was that whole debacle in Florida, and George Bush won, and they had to wait until Obama got into office to move forward on the deal. So this has been cooking for a very, very long time. Now, John McCain has uncharacteristically come on out criticizing Hillary Clinton and saying that he's sick of her whining, aren't we all? And he's saying, what's the point? She needs to get over it. Well, the point may be that she's not ready to give up. Certainly you saw indications of that following the election. She was riling up Antifa and Black Lives Matter, and they were gonna take the country by force if they had to. They were gonna drive Donald Trump and Mike Pence out of the Oval Office. Seems to have cooled down a little bit, but yeah, Hillary is not really showing herself to be one to forgive and forget what has been going on over there. Getting on back to that Trump-Russia dossier, more and more articles are coming on out saying there's nothing there. It is completely unbelievable. And a very good analysis came out of Investment Watch Blog, basically saying that if in point of fact Putin had compromised Donald Trump and had him under his control, that would be the biggest state secret of all. And nobody was going to give that away. Nobody's going to tell this Chris Steele, oh yeah, we're able to blackmail the U.S. president. So basically, Steele was making it up to get his money. And it was paid by, in turn, the Democratic National Committee, the Hillary Clinton campaign, and then apparently later on, the FBI. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Paul Craig Roberts has a very alarming article out that says, can't you see the war on the horizon? And he's starting off by talking about the reports in the British press that Russian President Putin has instructed Russia's industries to prepare themselves to be able to make a quick switch to war production, which seems prudent given the aggressions of the United States. And Paul Craig Roberts is saying the Russian government would not make such an announcement unless it was convinced the prospect of war with the West was very, very real. So we're edging closer and closer to a full-on real World War III because our government can't think of anything better to do. They can't fix the economy, can't fix the infrastructure. They don't want to accept responsibility for decades of bad management. So let's just start a war. We'll blow it all up and then nobody will know who's to blame here. Another article, this one coming out of Global Research, the American dream has been irreparably broken. And they're talking about a quote from Senator Fulbright's book, The Arrogance of Power, where he talks about even back in the 1960s, he was starting to see the decline of the American character, where we lost our moral compass. We've talked about that before. And he says, ever since the end of World War II, the so-called American dream has morphed into the American nightmare. Jobs offshored, outsourced, the middle class forced down into the lower class, the growth of bloated U.S. military positions around the world, and its position as enforcer of the U.S. government right to expropriate resources globally, to which it has no moral right. We're the bad guys. More and more people are starting to say that. And I know you don't want to hear it, but that's what's going on. Now then, getting on over to the war zones, Syria. The Syrian army has eliminated the ISIS-held pocket in the Euphrates Valley. There's just, all the major bases have been cleaned out. There's just a few of these little tiny groups that are still hiding out in various areas, and they're all being hunted down. And apparently the government is going to focus on liberating the last ISIS-held town in the pocket, Aiea. And that will basically clean ISIS out of the Euphrates. And again, you have Russia is saying it's time for the United States to leave. You have Syria saying it's time for the United States to leave. ISIS is gone. Even giving Sekdef Mattis the benefit of the doubt that the UN resolution against ISIS is all the authorization the U.S. needs to be in Syria, if ISIS is gone, that authorization doesn't apply. The U.S. government does not have a legal or moral right to be there. Russia was invited in. Iran was invited in. Syria did not invite or give permission for the United States to be carrying out military operations inside Syria. Now, apparently, Amar Wagaf, head of the British-based Middle East-focused think tank, basically came on out. He's the director of Gnosos, said that Syria's become a focal point, that the Western players' presence in Syria is really all about being aimed at Iran. We've got to weaken Iran. We've got to drag Iran down. And certainly we've been hearing that from Netanyahu over the last couple of weeks about how Iran is in Syria and Iran is coming to get us all. But interestingly enough, Israel's own defense minister, Avigdor Lieberman, flatly contradicted Netanyahu, saying that there are no Iranian military forces in Syria, saying that there are some experts and advisors, but there is no Iranian military inside Syria. So it may be another indicator of Netanyahu's declining political fortunes. Now, here's an interesting story. It came out a couple of days ago here at Zero Hedge. There is a report that Putin has approached both Netanyahu and Assad to make some kind of a deal to tone down this war, to tone it all down, to make it go away. And if, in fact, Iran does not have military forces in Syria, then there doesn't need to be a 40-kilometer demilitarized zone. Now, this could just be propaganda out there, but again, it doesn't seem to serve any purpose. So it might well be true. Now, do you remember that big stink a while ago where Poland wanted to buy the Russian S-400 air defense system? Let me do a message here to, we can't do BAM user today because, I can't get the, audio in, audio out from the phone into my regular mixer. And again, because BAM user is about to go away, it doesn't seem worth the effort to try and get it to work. So no, we're not on BAM user. So anyway, back to Poland and the S-400. And remember, the head of NATO came on in and said, if you don't buy the American system, there's going to be consequences. And so Poland apparently called off the deal with Russia for the S-400. They're buying the Patriot missile system from the United States in what amounts basically to be a bribe to the U.S. government to stay friends. It's all about the money. It's all about the weapon sales. It's all about business. Here's another article about the same thing. This is from 112 International. Nothing personal, just business. U.S. already supplying arms to Ukraine. And basically, President Trump is looking at signing a new defense law which will provide $50 million to grant Ukraine lethal defensive weapons. Well, if you're up close and personal, it's kind of hard to tell the difference between offensive and defensive. Lethal is lethal. And Kiev continues to hope the Pentagon will use these funds for its intended purpose, and Ukraine will finally get access to modern weapons of the United States. That, in turn, of course, would lead to a bloodbath, because apparently a member of the Ukrainian parliament, Yevgeny Rybchinsky, compared the inhabitants of Donbass with cockroaches and proposed, apparently seriously, to destroy them with dichlorovos, which is a poison used for insect infestation. This guy wrote this on his Facebook page. I'm not interested in the life of cockroaches. Even if 1 million of them are born in my kitchen, this will not mean the kitchen will belong to them. That's pretty tough talk, bordering on genocide. Now, apparently, the U.S. was caught flying yet another spy plane, a Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft, over the Black Sea, heading to the Russian territories, just probing, seeing where the gaps are, and discovered there is no gap there because Russia scrambled a Sukhoi 30 fighter jet that basically came on up to the surveillance aircraft, buzzed it, and at that point the surveillance aircraft turned off and flew away. So everybody's rattling their sabers out there. Now, Tom Friedman, supposedly liberal columnist for the New York Times and the imperial messenger of the U.S. establishment. This guy's a piece of work. He was the leading cheerleader for the illegal and criminal invasion of Iraq in 2003 that set the Middle East on this course of bloodshed, destruction, starvation, famine, cholera, horror. This guy called the invasion of Iraq the most radical, liberal, revolutionary war the U.S. has ever launched. And this is the same guy who's now out there glorifying Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince bin Salman, who is a war criminal based on what he's been doing in Yemen. So I guess to work in the corporate media, you have to be able to change your mind 6 times a day, certainly more often than you're changing your underwear. Now, Britain's secret role in Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen has been exposed. Apparently, somebody accidentally leaked out some photos and videos that proved that the British Army is training Saudi Arabian troops to fight in Yemen, when Saudi Arabia has been accused of committing crimes against humanity. And apparently up to 50 British military personnel have been teaching battlefield skills to soldiers who will be deployed in this war. Now, thousands of civilians have already been killed in bombing raids. An estimated 1 million children are facing starvation and serious illness. And obviously Britain is an accessory to all of that and is being held up to the world for shame, as well as it should. Now, Turkish military announced Tuesday it bombarded over 40 positions of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in northern Salmanaya province. And the airstrikes were launched in the Assos region near the mountainous border with Turkey. And apparently they killed 12 PKK militants in the process. So everybody's bombing everybody. So let's talk about North Korea's ballistic missile. Everybody's trying to make a big deal about that. North Korea test launched a ballistic missile yesterday. Their longest reaching missile yet. It flew 2,800 miles straight up, way above where the space station is orbiting, and came back down and crashed into the ocean. It hit water. Didn't hit anything but water. But they're out there screaming, oh my goodness, it hit Japan's exclusionary economic zone or some such nonsense to make it look like it's a big deal. Well, countries fire test missiles all the time. That's part of making sure they're going to work. But the important part about this new test is this is North Korea's longest range missile, and it's capable of hitting all of the U.S. mainland, including the East Coast. And will be able to carry a nuclear weapon when North Korea succeeds in miniaturizing one. So I would say North Korea is now off the list of to be invaded countries by the U.S. government, because the U.S. government only attacks nations unable to fight back, like Yemen, Somalia, Syria, and they didn't even do all that well in Syria. And that may explain Donald Trump's rather tepid reaction to the missile launch, where he came out and had a press conference and said, we'll take care of it. That was it, the sum and substance of it. We'll take care of it. I think Kim Jong-un rolled the dice, betting that he could get his nuclear deterrent put together before the U.S. could find an excuse to invade. And it looks like he's won. So the U.S. can scream weapons of mass destruction all they want, but Kim Jong-un is out there saying, we're only building these because of U.S. aggression. The U.S. being the only country in history to actually use a nuclear weapon of mass destruction against the civilians of another country. And more we're just seeing these other countries, these other governments, are just sick and tired of America's wars. And they're sick and tired of the lies. Because the wars, plural, is not only costing the American economy, it's costing the global economy. We're going to take a break now for some commercials. We'll be back with a phone call after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and grab your paper and pencil, because if you'd like to help out Republic Broadcasting stay on the air and deal with all of these frustrating technical issues, the postal address to send a check, money order, box tops, Christmas cards is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, and that's in the city of Round Rock, Texas, 78664. If you want to phone on in and give a credit card or debit card number, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. All right, let's go on over to the phones here right now. Dave in Hungary, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, sir. Hey, Mike, thanks for taking my call. Listen, I'd like to get some speculative commentary from any of the members of your listening audience who are so inclined on kind of bizarre situation that developed a few days ago. It's numerous of why the source of a Thanksgiving pie is apparently given equal news time and focus to the situation in North Korea and several other countries.
Okay, Dave, can you speak a little bit louder? I'm having trouble hearing you.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking into a computer. I'll say this a little bit more slowly. Can you hear me now?
I hear you now.
All right. I'd like to invite some speculative commentary from members of your listening audience regarding a kind of bizarre situation that developed a few days ago in which the source of a Thanksgiving pie is given approximately equal news time by the major networks to the situation in North Korea and a number of other fairly serious stories. I'd just like to get some commentary on that. It seems that like people are getting major news networks are focusing on some people of the critical matter. I mean, I have.
Hey, you got to speak up. I'm sorry, you keep fading.
All right, I'll speak a little bit louder. Are you hearing me now?
Just barely.
Ah, Jesus. All right. Let me turn up the gain on this. Sorry about this, Mike. Okay, I'll run through this again. I think it's kind of ruining it. I have absolutely no doubt that Sarah Huckabee Sanders actually baked the pie. However, it was the wrong shape. Everybody knows pie are squared. She ought to ditch the book, consult an algebra. That's all I got to say. All right.
Okay, I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you go here because I really am having difficulty understanding you. Let's switch over to Dustin in New Jersey. Dustin, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike.
Hi.
He called from Hungary? Like the country?
That's what he claimed. I don't know.
Hey, at least they got a deal going with the Russians, huh?
Yes.
Economic deals, and then if Poland wants to be that much of a bunch of wusses and buy the Patriot system, which is like a lesser aircraft weapon than the S-400, and it's probably more expensive too. They got the raw deal, Mike. Doesn't hurt Russia to just sell it to somebody else.
Yeah, they will, but I think the reason they came down hard on Poland is they saw it as the beginning of a trend where the Syrian war has given Russia an opportunity to actually show its weapons in a real combat environment, and they have performed splendidly, as opposed to Donald Trump's cruise missile attack against that Syrian airbase, where half the cruise missiles missed the target completely. So no amount of fancy brochures or advertising is going to overcome that. People are going to want the most bang for their buck. And Russia's armaments industry is doing very, very well. The American military-industrial complex is resorting to arm twisting and politics to try and get people to keep buying its products.
But that's all we have, Mike. That's where the economy is in. It's a warfare state. Unfortunately, that's toward the end of an empire. That's it, Mike. We have nothing else to offer. We talked about this before. Nothing else to offer the rest of the world. We don't make anything. The British don't make anything. The French really don't make anything, not enough to keep their economies propped up except for weapons. The British are the number one sellers to Saudi Arabia next to the U.S., I believe. So, that's all they got to offer, Mike. It's sad. Hey, Mike, on North Korea, it's checkmate. We're not going to do anything against them. You know,
I don't think we are. I don't think we are. I mean, unless they go on in and do a decapitation strike on the North Korean capital and just take out all their command and government structure. But I'm sure by now North Korea has dispersed their nuclear warheads and their other missiles. They've got a credible deterrent. And I think Kim Jong-un has won his gamble. Anyway, Dustin, we got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Erica, welcome back to our show here. And let's see. I think we still had some other callers on the line here. If I could get a relist from Mike. Meanwhile, in response to the North Korea missile test, Jim Inhofe, is now saying we need an increased missile defense system in light of the new North Korea missile test. And he's out there saying, we got to spend more money. We've got to have a missile defense system. Really, I thought we had one. Remember all that money Reagan spent on the Strategic Defense Initiative? That supposedly bought us a missile defense system, the one they were testing when they accidentally shot down TWA-800. I mean, if the Aegis Standard missiles don't work and the Patriot doesn't work, if THAAD isn't a deterrent, building more of the same isn't going to help. This is just grabbing more money to pour into the military-industrial complex. North Korea is not going to haul off and attack anybody with a nuclear missile unless they themselves are attacked. That's the whole point of a nuclear deterrent. You don't throw that away. You sit on it, you keep it, you maintain it, you take care of it, because it sends a message. Invading my country will cost you more than it is worth. So they're trying to make another big issue about North Korea, saying about how, well, the missile could easily stray off target. It could accidentally hit a neighbor. Now remember, a couple of days ago, North Korea came out with a statement saying none of the other countries in the area have anything to fear from North Korea. Japan doesn't, China doesn't, Taiwan doesn't. They have nothing to fear because the only reason North Korea embarked on this course of nuclear missiles was to deter an invasion by the United States of America. And nobody else has anything to worry about. So now it's, well, they might come down accidentally. They could accidentally hit one of our friends, and that's why we have to take their missiles away. Which is kind of interesting because apparently Russia just dumped a big one, a Soyuz rocket, carrying a Russian weather satellite and 18 microsatellites, and right now it's at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And nobody's screaming about, oh, we've got to take rockets away from Russia because they might accidentally come down and hit something. Remember when Skylab fell out of orbit? Don't worry, it'll hit the ocean. No, it hit Australia. Killed some sheep. Well, you know, these things happen. It's just, you know, these things happen. But with North Korea, everything they do is being turned into a provocation to justify an invasion and an attack, which at this point would be very foolhardy. With a demonstrated capacity to hit the mainland United States, thank goodness they won't be thinking about hitting us here in Hawaii. That changes the equation. The United States government does not make war on nations that can actually fight back. Look at the last 16 years. It's all these little, tiny, impoverished nations with all kinds of undeveloped mineral resources and wealth. And the U.S. goes on in and whoops them around and stands there saying, look how butch we are. We went on in and we gave Somalia what for. And we're helping Saudi Arabia, or we're telling Saudi Arabia to give Yemen what for. And we're going to pretend that Syria never happened, of course. But look, we gave Libya what for. None of those countries had a nuclear deterrent. That's why they got invaded. Kim Jong-un was right. We have seen what happens when countries give up their nuclear deterrent. Libya gave up their nuclear weapon program on the assurance that they'd be left alone. They got invaded. Saddam gave up his chemical weapons on the promise he would not be invaded. He got invaded. Same thing with Syria and Assad. Assad gave up his chemical weapons, and the U.S. came on in and started trying to take Assad out. So that's basically the pattern. And Kim Jong-un is smart enough to realize it. If he surrenders his weapons, it's like rolling out the red carpet for the U.S. government to walk on in and take over the place. And remembering how badly the North Koreans suffered at the start of the Korean War, they don't want to go through that again. Now, here's an article, and we've talked about this subject before. This is over at Global Research up in Canada. And basically, we've all been sold on this idea that ISIS is a bunch of terrorists. They're out of control. They're terrifying terrorists. They're coming to get us. They're going to kill Santa Claus this year. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. But more and more, it's obvious that ISIS is actually a geopolitical tool of the U.S. government. We know the U.S. has been supplying both ISIS and Al-Qaeda with weapons and other material support in Syria, and who knows where all else. And every time the U.S. thinks they need a reason to invade someplace, ISIS conveniently shows up. They're talking about escalating in Afghanistan. Oh, well, we have to. All of a sudden, there's ISIS all over Afghanistan. Remember when relations with the Philippines were destroyed by Obama going on down and telling Duterte, go easy on the drug smugglers? And Duterte said, you mind your own business. This is our country. And just ended the relations. And Philippines started pivoting toward China. And all of a sudden, ISIS shows up. Oh, the U.S. is going to have to invade. Fortunately, the Philippine army was able to make short work of the ISIS terrorists, for lack of a better word. China may have helped. But that's the pattern. ISIS is this cardboard cutout of a terrorist that the U.S. just plants in the middle of a country they want to invade. Oh, we got to invade. ISIS is there. War on terror, And Western think tanks are trying to come up with a narrative to explain why ISIS is just spreading all across Southeast Asia. Next, we're going to be told they're in North Korea. That may be the excuse. Oh, ISIS is in North Korea. Now we have to invade. Golly gee shuckies. Over at the United Nations, and I think they're getting tired of all of this stuff, Secretary General Antonio Guterres Tuesday released a report critical of Israel and their violations of Lebanon's sovereignty and Hezbollah's continued armed presence in Lebanon. And I think the criticism of Hezbollah may have been an attempt to pacify Israel by making the report look balanced, but Hezbollah basically has been the sole protector of Lebanon from Israel's invasions. And Israel hasn't given up the dream of conquering Lebanon at least up to the Litani River, and eventually as part of Eretz Israel. Now, we have talked many times before about how U.S. aid, your tax dollars to Israel, is actually illegal under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act. And now, there is a lawsuit that's been filed by Grant Smith, the director of the Institute for Research Middle Eastern Policy, pointing on out that back in 1976, Congress passed the International Security Assistance and Arms Export Control Act, which also bans U.S. financial aid to non-signatories of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that possess nuclear weapons. So there's 3 laws that the U.S. government is in violation of when they send your money to Israel. Now, apparently, Netanyahu is feeling the heat over his corruption charges, and apparently the Knesset did go ahead and vote through this new law. It's called the Netanyahu Law, which retroactively protects Prime Minister Netanyahu from these ongoing investigations. And basically the bill protects all elected officials from such investigations. And the bill intends to forbid police from recommending charges be brought in their investigations. In other words, they've effectively admitted, yeah, Netanyahu did it, but we're not going to do anything about it. So, there we are. Now, apparently there's been another attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque by Israeli settlers. They stormed the compound, and apparently a lot of violence committed by Israeli forces and the settlers against the Palestinian people. That's one of the really tragic things about this. When the Israeli settlers attack the mosque and try and vandalize it, the Israeli police help them. And they beat up the Palestinians who are just there to worship. And apparently, 52 settlers and an archaeologist forced their way into the holy site through the Bab al-Maghirabah under tight protection of several groups of Israeli soldiers and special police forces. And the settlers performed acts deemed provocative to Palestinians in the mosque courtyard. So they're trying to provoke a reaction. I remember this movie, Kingdom of Heaven. Ridley Scott directed it. And he's a good director. I regret I never got a chance to work with him. But there's one point at the end when Salahuddin is negotiating with Balian for the surrender of the city of Jerusalem. And Balian says, if you try and take this city by force, we'll destroy it all. Every rock, every stone that makes men mad, we will just burn it to the ground. And Salahuddin says, I wonder if that might not be the best thing. Because it is this little tiny piece of land is just inspired, for lack of a better word, so much hate and anger. Okay, let's take a phone call. Ken in Fort Worth. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Google 220 Marines landed at Langley, Virginia, CIA headquarters. What's that all about?
I think it's a hoax. There was no confirmation of it,
it really is?
whatsoever. They're trying to make a big deal out of these large number of sealed indictments. Except that if you go to the actual court records, the indictments may be sealed, but most of them actually have the names of the litigants on them. And so, contrary to the rumor that's being circulated around the net, they're not all involving a pedophile ring or the Clintons or so forth and so on. A lot of indictments are handed down sealed. Until they're unsealed, there's really not much you can say about them, just that they're out there. And just like an allegation of sexual harassment, an indictment is not proof. It's not conviction. It's merely saying that you're going to be charged and have your day in court.
But you think the Marines actually did land there and go in there?
No, I found no confirmation of it whatsoever.
Okay, anyway, I was reading it and I was snooping around and thinking, anyway, give something to think about. Okay.
Well, you need to understand right now, in an effort to try and destroy the credibility of the independent media, there are a whole bunch of new websites that have been set up with very, important sounding names like, Liberty News, thus and such, and they're hoax sites. And what they do is they're trying to feed these baited stories onto the net in the hope that they'll be picked up and copied by websites so that the corporate media can say, well, look over there at thus and such blog, they're talking about this story and it's already been discredited, so you can't really listen to anything that they say and believe it. And it's a propaganda technique called poisoning the well, but you have to be very, very careful about, where this information is coming from and where its original source is. There are, unfortunately, too many bloggers who will see that story floating around in their email, and they'll just add it to their blog without digging back, following the trail to the source and checking out the source. Okay? Okay, he hung up. All right. Now then, we were talking the other week about this submarine that vanished off the coast of Argentina. And the story is coming out, albeit slowly. After a few days went by, the Argentine military reported that there had been an event detected on the hydrophones. And now we're getting the story that there was a final message which reported an onboard fire and that water had been flooding into the submarine through the snorkel when the sub was charging batteries. And he said the water entered through the ventilation system to a battery connection tray and caused a short circuit and the beginning of a fire. And in addition to that, if they're your basic lead acid batteries and you get salt water into them, they start producing chlorine gas. And you can gas your crew before you even know what's going on. So, mechanical failure, because the snorkels on subs do have floats and valves on them. so that if there's a heavy wave, they'll close off and not let the water in there. But apparently that malfunctioned, and at this point it's obvious the crew is definitely lost, and that is really a bit of a shame. Okay. Now then, talking about the economy. As you know, Jerome Powell has been nominated by President Trump to be the new chairman of the Federal Reserve, and he's released the text of remarks that he's basically delivering at his confirmation hearing before the Senate Banking Committee. And Powell said he expected the central bank to continue raising its benchmark interest rate and trimming its balance sheet under his leadership. But he had some pointed comments over deregulation, economic stability, and the plunge protection team. It's nice that they're actually starting to talk about that. But he had this odd quote from the middle of his prepared remarks, saying that the Fed will respond with force to threats to the nation's stability. And I'm not exactly sure what he means by that, but it's kind of an inappropriate thing, I think, for a banker to be saying, and that's exactly what his job is going to be. Chairman of the Federal Reserve, it's still private central banking here. Now, here's another very strange story that came on out. And as you know, Russia has been building up their gold reserves, that they see it as essential to preserving their national security. And apparently, one of the Russia's officials warned the U.S. against confiscating Russian gold reserves, saying it would be tantamount to a financial war or economic violence. And everybody's saying, what the heck was going on? But apparently the concern in Russia is that a new round of sanctions against Russia by Washington, D.C. might include orders to seize and confiscate Russian assets held outside of Russia itself, gold bullion they have in other banks. And apparently they think this is a very credible and viable threat, and they may be right when you look at how our government plays fast and loose with gold, along with the Fed, the New York Fed, and these other gold depositories. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economic news here. And interestingly enough, the state of Alaska has just signed a gas pipeline project with China. And the agreement, Alaska Governor Bill Walker signed last Thursday in Beijing with Sinopec, China Investment Corporation, and the Bank of China, does not guarantee the pipeline will be built, but it gives the lingering liquefied natural gas project a jolt of life. And they're saying the market seems to be responding to the possibility of this pipeline. What an amazing engineering project that would be. A pipeline from Alaska to China. I know they've been talking about a tunnel for quite some time. I just hope that they build the pipeline so it's leak-proof. Because certainly so many of the pipelines that have been built recently seem to be just cheap, shoddy construction, lesser grade material, substandard, and that's why we're hearing about all these leaks all over the place. It's all about profit. When we were talking, when I was talking with John Stedmiller about my problems with Spectrum, and he said, the problem is that large corporations are not investing money back in their own infrastructure. They're just profit-taking. They're taking the money, putting it in their pocket. And that, too, is a symptom of descent into economic fascism. Now, getting on over to Britain and Europe, the European Union could add post-Brexit Britain to its tax haven blacklist unless it cleans up its act. And apparently the EU is pushing this issue for more pressure on Britain, saying that if you leave, if Brexit goes forward, we're going to put you on our tax haven blacklist. And that would result in a slowdown of economic activity between Britain and the rest of Europe. So the EU is going to publish their list of tax havens on December 5th, and basically saying using the EU zone criteria, Britain and 5 other EU countries would find themselves on the list if the criteria were applied to them. So we'll see what's going on there. Now, to immigration, the migrant problem. Here's another article. This is out of Russia Today. 43% of the unaccompanied underage migrants in Germany turn out to be adults. 43%. Out of a total of 55,890 asylum seekers claiming to be under the age of 18 and being treated as juveniles by German authorities, 24,116 were officially over the age of 18 and legally adults, according to Die Welt. So, in some German cities, the proportion of false underage migrants appears to be even higher. In Hamburg, for example, 47% claiming to be minors turned out to be of adult age. 49%. Again, there's the music. Time for us to do station identification. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, as we continue to work through our little tech issues. And I'm getting all kinds of emails about alternatives to Skype. And alternatives to BAM user, and hopefully we can get some of these issues resolved so that we don't have to do this over the phone line. But I just over the station break, I did another internet speed test on Spectrum, and it was like 9 megabits per second download and 5 upload, which is actually better than we've been doing. But that's still abysmal. And again, go to a search engine and type in Spectrum sucks, and you will get this education of just how bad this company is in terms of actually delivering on their promises. And right now they're running all these commercials on there about how they're so much better than Hawaiian Tel and so forth and so on, and they misquoted the prices and the performance. And like I said, I'd switch right now, but this neighborhood has not been wired for DSL. So I'm going to look into this wireless fixed internet just for the Skype machine alone, and hopefully that will make our problems go away. Getting on back to immigration and Europe, the mayor of the western German town of Altena suffered a slash to the neck in what security authorities believe was an attack with a political motive. And apparently the problem is that this mayor has been taking in more refugees than he was required to under the quota system. And so apparently somebody got really upset and attacked him. Now, down in France, I guess they've hit their breaking point, because French President Macron is now saying to the Moroccan migrants, you have to go back, because you're not in danger in Morocco, and France can't give papers to everyone. And I'm sure he's going to get a nasty phone call from George Soros saying, yes, you can give papers to everybody. But Macron basically said, if you're not in danger, you should go back to your country. And he's absolutely right. This open borders thing has just spun totally out of control. And apparently, up in Sweden, they're getting ready for their elections. And the Sweden Democrats leader has this ad out there basically saying that the liberal globalist establishment has allowed Islam and third world immigration to destroy Sweden. And we've been talking about all the problems up in Sweden. It's become the rape capital of Europe. Joggers actually have to have armed bodyguards now so that they can run down the street without being attacked. Sweden, as we think it exists, doesn't exist anymore. Much of Europe the same way. You look at the photos that are coming on over, they're losing their culture. They're losing their identity, which of course is, I think, part of the grand plan. To steal from all of us our history, our identity, our sense of self, to make it easier to control us. Now, speaking of George Soros, as you know, he's in this tiff with Hungary. And Hungary is calling for his investigation, and Soros is now out there launching a media blitz against the entire government of Hungary for wanting to go after him and finding out just how deeply involved he is in this open borders movement and who is on his payroll to go along with this. Because it stands to reason, stands to common sense. You look at the leaders of these countries, they have to know what's going on in their streets. The skyrocketing rapes, crimes in general, contagious diseases, gangs, drug problems coming on in. They have to have a motive for continuing to go along with the open borders policy. And that motive may be a true belief in the glories of a one world government and a new world order, or it might be a financial inducement. And I think everybody has a right to know if that's really what's going on, after all the damage that's been done in Europe and here in the United States of America. Now, self-proclaimed press freedom watchdog Reporters Without Borders has launched a new campaign that it says is very important. They want to shut down a short panel discussion by journalist Vanessa Beeley and Swedish Doctors for Human Rights, because apparently they're discussing the white helmets and the recent revelations that the white helmets are just part of the Syrian terrorist forces. They just put on the helmets and they make fake videos saying, oh my goodness, look at the bad things Assad is doing. And so this press freedom organization is saying, no, we can't have that panel. Shush, censorship. That's not press freedom. I'm waiting for somebody to stamp on the floor of Congress and say that dissent cannot be allowed in a time of potential war or real war. They're going to go after that First Amendment. They've gutted all the rest of them, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment, Second Amendment. And Israel certainly is on the warpath against the First Amendment. They hate the First Amendment. I guess right about now, so do the Clintons and the Bushes. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, as long as we're talking about Spectrum and the terrible quality service here, for years, Comcast has been promising it won't violate the principles of net neutrality, regardless of any rules the government makes or repeals or changes. And that meant that Comcast promised they wouldn't block or throttle lawful internet traffic, and that it wouldn't create fast lanes in order to collect tolls from web companies that want priority access over the Comcast network. And this is one of the ways in which Comcast argued that the FCC should not reclassify broadband providers as common carriers, a designation that forces ISPs to treat customers fairly in other ways. The common carrier concept came in when the Bell Telephone Company was broken up into the baby bells. And this Title II common carrier classification, that's what makes the net neutrality rules enforceable. Well, apparently Comcast is now hinting that they are going to go ahead with paid fast lanes after the repeal of net neutrality. And it's not just a giveaway to these large companies that can afford the faster bandwidth. There's only so much bandwidth out there. Certainly that's true with Spectrum. So if they're going to give higher priority to this company over here, that's going to reduce the bandwidth to everybody else. Maybe that's what's happening out here in Hawaii. I think one possibility to explain the absolutely poor performance that we're seeing is not having upgraded their local systems and dealing with Cyber Monday and all the new hardware that's come online in the last few days. It may be that Spectrum is boosting download speeds at the expense of upload speeds. Now, Spectrum has said they don't throttle, but if you look very carefully at their descriptions of service at their own website, there's a comment in there about how they will slow net traffic to balance load on the network. The only way they get away with saying they don't throttle is they're not using that word. But that's a perfect description of throttling. By the way, do you know that over the last several years, you have, through your telephone and broadband bills, paid $400 billion for a fiber optic internet that doesn't exist? That's something to think about. There's been a surcharge on all of these bills, phone bills, cable TV, internet. There's a surcharge to fund the development of a fiber optic internet. And it never happened. The money got spent someplace else. And it's rather ironic when you consider that the United States invented the internet, not Al Gore, but DARPA. And we have just fallen in terms of our network performance relative to the rest of the world. Right now, the U.S. ranks 9th in the world in fixed broadband speed. And apparently the picture is even worse when you look at mobile internet speed, where the U.S. ranks 46th, just ahead of Albania and behind Oman. And that's important as more and more of our commerce switches over to mobile devices. So, again, this could have even been added to that wonderful speech from HBO's The Newsroom, where Will McAvoy is saying America's not the greatest country on earth anymore. We created the internet. We don't have the best internet in the world. Not even close. So $400 billion over the years to fund a fiber optic internet, and it's never been built. It's amazing here. Now, a little bit of good news, and I certainly hope this is available here. Russia is planning to create an independent internet by next year to protect it from global internet malfunctions. And what they're talking about is they're going to start setting up their own backbone systems in Russia that people could connect to. Right now, the U.S. still has a monopoly on the internet because of these large American corporations that run the backbone, like Level 3. But as we're seeing already, with net neutrality about to be ended, with the government refusing to treat the internet as common carrier or to regulate it as a public utility, which it ought to be. It's a critical part of our infrastructure. Businesses depend on it. This isn't just a bunch of gamers and hobbyists and enthusiasts out there playing on the wires. Everybody's life is now tangled up with that internet. It is a utility, and it ought to be treated as such. So Russia's going to set this new internet up, and it's going to operate separately from the current DNS system used worldwide. I certainly hope I can get a cable out here in Hawaii for it. And already it's coming under criticism saying, they're building a system to attack the United States internet. They're building their own permanent botnet. And there will be a fight. I'm sure there will be. Not for the military ramifications, but the economic ones. The same reason the companies are turning away from the U.S. Federal Reserve note and they're going to BRICS and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and so forth. You're going to see people turning away from American internet service providers who are not providing what they promised to provide. Not even close, in our case out here in Hawaii. And I think people will turn away and connect to the Russian version of the internet. There's no reason we can't have multiple internets. Now, there's been a huge problem, as you know, with leaks from inside the NSA. The NSA originally said, well, we're being hacked, we're being broken into, it's those evil Russians. But as it turns out, more and more of these very powerful cybernetic weapons are being leaked out. And one of the places where they were leaking them out is they were using Amazon Web Services storage server. And it's a public server. It didn't even have a password, and this stuff was just on there. 100 gigabytes of data from an Army intelligence project codenamed Red Disk. And the disk image belongs to the U.S. Army's Intelligence and Security Command, known as INSCOM, a division of both the Army and the NSA. And they just put it on up there. Remember when Bev Harris at Black Box Voting got the source code for the GEMS election system so that she could look at it and find all the ways it was set up to steal elections? Somebody had just left it on a wide open FTP server. No password. All the security software in the world is not going to work if your people aren't thinking about security. Remember that one where some NSA employee took a bunch of these files home with him put him on his home computer, which had been backdoored because he downloaded a pirated copy of Microsoft Office. And so those got out there into the wild. They tried to blame Russia, but that's not what happened. And another problem, of course, is that the companies that make our computers and our software just aren't really doing a very good job. And I know when you have a machine, you're constantly getting security updates, but apparently there is a 17-year-old vulnerability in Microsoft Office. It's considered severe. It allows hackers to install malware on targeted computers without any user interaction. And apparently it's now being exploited in the wild to distribute a backdoor malware. And apparently this vulnerability that Cobalt malware utilizes to deliver the backdoor is a memory corruption issue that allows unauthenticated remote attackers to execute malicious code on the targeted machine when opening a malicious file and potentially take full control over it. Which reminds me, I got a bunch of emails from people, I don't know who they are, they all had Excel sheets in there. So, of course, I didn't pay any attention to them whatsoever. And if you have Microsoft Office, the very, very first thing you should be doing is turning off macros. Just disable them completely. It's the most common vector for a malware attack in Office. Anyway, this Cobalt malware is delivered through spam emails, which are disguised as a notification from Visa regarding rule changes in Russia with an attachment that includes a malicious, rich text format document. So, it's nasty. Now, over in the European Union, there was hope that there was going to be a ban on glyphosate, and unfortunately, the European Union has now voted to renew the license of glyphosate, and apparently the proposal at the EU Commissioner's Appeal Committee received 18 votes in favor, 9 against, with 1 abstention, ending months of deadlock. And this new license will allow them to spray this known human carcinogen all over the ground and the food and the plants of the European Union. France, however, says they will ban the use of glyphosate within 3 years. They're not recognizing the license. And, well, they should not. We live in a world right now where these corporations and their CEOs have become so greedy, so addicted to money, they're perfectly okay selling dangerous products as long as the profits are rolling on in. And they're going to keep on doing it as long as the government just looks the other way or winks an eye, because they're getting all kinds of campaign contributions from those same corporations. It is a system that basically is inevitably leads to the deterioration of the quality of life, quality of health in our country. Now, as you know, we're coming into the winter. It's cold and flu season. And the signs and commercials are already out there. You got to get your vaccine. Get your flu vaccination. It's important for you. But according to this article that came on out in Blacklisted News, somebody found a file in the Department of Health and Human Services talking about the fact that the greatest percentage of damages compensated for with vaccines were for the flu vaccine. And most of those were for Guillain-Barré syndrome. And so basically, the flu vaccine is the most dangerous vaccine in the U.S. based on settled cases for injuries. They can't prove the stuff is safe. They can't even prove it's effective. Remember, we reported a week ago that the flu virus for the vaccine is cultured in eggs. And the process mutates the virus to a form that's infectious for chickens. So when you get that shot in your arm, along with all the adjuvants and the aluminum and everything else that's in there, you're getting the wrong pathogen. You're getting a flu virus that you are already immune to. And that's why the flu vaccine is so ineffective. Something else the advertisers don't want to admit to you. But again, it makes money. As long as it's making money, it's going to continue. And even worse, we're now in a stage where more and more governments are being co-opted, to put it politely, to enforce vaccination, to force you to buy a product you may not need. You may be concerned about its harm. They don't care. You will take your shot and you will pay for it. It's just another way of plundering and pillaging the population for the enrichment of these corporations. We're going to take a break for commercials and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And once again, grab your paper and pencil. I'm going to give you the address. If you want to support Republic Broadcasting and keep us on the air, then you need to send in a donation. And if you want to do it by mail, the address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 302, Round Rock, Texas, 78664. And if you want to call in a donation over the phone, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. Now then, it just seems to be getting worse. Talk about crumbling infrastructure. American Airlines apparently has had a glitch in their planning system. And apparently they don't have pilots for many of their holiday flights. Rather a large number. It's not like they're going to be able to call up a couple of pilots and fill the shortages. Huge numbers of overscheduled flights where the pilots are not available. Somebody messed up on that one. Okay, now then, let's get on over to Bali. The eruption of Mount Agung has now shifted to magmatic, meaning there's now lava is coming out of the volcano. It's not just gas and ash and pyroclastics. They are evacuating 100,000 people, and they're concerned about lahars coming down from the higher slopes of the mountains. So this is going to be a nasty one. And I remember when Claire and I lived in Washington State, where we went on over and looked at the remains of Mount St. Helens and just this incredible devastation that had happened. And it really reminds you just how powerful the forces of nature are and can be, which is why this idea that we can destroy the earth with our plastic bags and our carbon fuels is really kind of ridiculous. And speaking of global warming and carbon credits, there's an interesting little article, was over in the Daily Mail, where they're acknowledging that Britain is headed into a very tough winter. And so they wrote this article where they're out there trying to save the legend of global warming, saying that, well, what's going on now is a La Nina event. And that it was La Nina that caused the cold that Charles Dickens wrote about in the 19th century with like A Christmas Carol. And so they're out there, even as we head into this really rough winter, they're still pushing that. They're pushing that idea. It's a lot of propaganda out there. Now, here's an interesting story. Apparently, there is a plan to launch a space mission to deal with the space junk, which has become a major, major problem. There's a lot of stuff up there. There was an incident where a very tiny piece of debris hit one of the space shuttles and gouged a huge hole in one of the windows. Fortunately, they're multi-layer and there wasn't any leak. But it is a real problem. And there have been incidents where small bits of debris have impacted the space station, which has an outer coating, but they have to be very, very careful. And the next time you see a picture of that cupola, the little bubble with windows on all sides that you can go on in and just see the beauty of Earth, if you look carefully, you'll see that there are covers that are normally closed over it to protect it. And look how thick those covers are. That'll tell you how bad the problem is. So they're calling the spacecraft Remove Debris, and it's going to attempt to snare a small satellite with a net and test whether a harpoon is an effective garbage grabber. And maybe, but I had a much simpler system that I think would work quite well, and that would be to simply have a rocket that goes straight up and straight down, much less fuel, much less energy, and the peak of the arc is right in front of an oncoming piece of space debris. And it simply puffs out a little bubble of carbon dioxide. And the space debris slams into that, and it slows down enough to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. And I think that would be, there's definitely an aiming, targeting problem that you have to solve. But I think that would actually work. And of course, you would want a launch facility as close to the equator as possible, because some of the space junk is in equatorial orbit. And we have, of course, Hawaii out here, which could use a little bit boost of its own local space industry. Now, apparently there's been a new study, and it confirms what's been reported before, but this is a new one out there. Basically showing there are super high levels of aluminum found in the brains of autistic patients. And, of course, the pharmaceutical industries deny this vaccine aluminum autism connection, but aluminum is a known neurotoxin. And there's a mandated maximum safety limit of exposure, and the vaccine's aluminum content is actually much higher. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back. Call on in, 800-313-9443. Aloha, welcome back to the show here. And anyway, we're talking about this new research that's out showing that toxic aluminum, high levels of toxic aluminum, are found in the brains of autistic patients. And basically what the study has done is it's looked at all the mandatory vaccines and boosters given to children by the age of 18 months. And it's basically 5,000 micrograms of aluminum, which is a huge amount. It's known to be a neurotoxin. And you have to wonder, why are they putting it in there? It doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. And obviously, if the brains of autistic patients have got this aluminum in there, it had to come from the vaccines. So, again, they're selling a dangerous, harmful product, and they get away with it because it makes money. And the government looks the other way. The government favors the corporations. It's life under fascism here. Now, here's an interesting little story. The Russians are claiming, we have to be careful about this, they're claiming to have found alien life on the outside of the International Space Station. And apparently, the cosmonaut was outside doing maintenance, and basically found this sludge which contained live bacteria. And Russian engineer Anton Shkaplerov said the microorganisms were obviously not there at the launch of the ISS in 1998. They had to come from somewhere else. Now, supposedly, they have done initial tests aboard the ISS showing that these microbes are harmless to humans, and they're going to bring them back down to Earth to take a look and see what they are. Now, I have a couple of suggestions. First and foremost, yeah, could happen. Or these are earthly microbes which in the harsh environment of space have mutated to protect themselves. That's another possibility. Now, I saw an interesting show the other day talking about the history of Mars. And Mars, of course, is my favorite planet outside of Earth. And they were talking about the evidence of this horrendous impact 4.5 billion years ago that apparently splashed much of Mars' atmosphere and water out into space. And the indications are that there might have actually been life on Mars before life arose right here on Earth. Because of the timing, life on Earth appears to have emerged just a little over 3.5 billion years old, at least as far as the fossil evidence. So the idea of panspermia from Mars is not that far-fetched anymore. Remember the meteorite they found that is known to come from Mars? And they know it comes from Mars because we've had the rovers and landers on Mars. And we know what the chemical compounds, the signatures, that says, yes, this is a piece of Mars I'm holding here in my hand. And it was that one that they found with these structures inside that looked like fossil microbes. And of course, on Viking, in 1976, Dr. Gilbert Levin's labeled release experiment seemed to indicate the presence of life in the soil. But nobody seems to want to take the step forward and say, yeah, this really is what's going on here. So hopefully this is a benign life form and they didn't make a mistake. Or it could just, again, until they get it down and look at it and see if it's really extraterrestrial, because everyone likes to assume that life in other worlds is going to be based on the same chemistry. It'll have DNA. It'll have the same proteins. And its elemental makeup is probably going to be the same because of the distribution of elements in the universe. But I think we're being species chauvinistic, if you will, speciesist. And that we have to hold open the possibility of life evolving anywhere that there's raw material, a fluid medium mixing, and a source of energy, which would include Saturn's moon, Titan. All right, we're going to start taking some phone calls. Tim in Wyoming, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, thanks for taking my call. I appreciate your take on your particular take on panspermia, et cetera. I've heard that before, but I wanted to talk about something else. You were talking about space junk, so to speak, and the question I had about that. Now, when if they puff out, like as you say, send something up, send a rocket up, just make sure that the orbit and the trajectory of the rocket, orbit of the device or whatever it is, the junk and the trajectory of the rocket coincide. So then you puff out the carbon dioxide, which would cause a solid mass for the slowing of the particle, whatever it happened to be, to cause it to fall down and into our atmosphere and burn up. Now, what about if they used something like a giant net, if you will, something like that, something that would basically fly around like a flying vacuum cleaner, and I mean, obviously that's kind of a joke, but at the same time, something similar to that would probably work, I would think. But now I wanted to mention one other thing, and I was talking with the
before you go on to that, I'd like to respond to what you said here. The problem with any kind of a system that is going to go on up and just sort of try and sweep up the debris is that it is traveling at very high rates of speed, often at very dramatic angles of inclination. Not everything is following the exact same path around the Earth. You've got objects in near polar orbits, high inclination orbits, and their relative velocity where they're crossing each other, where you might want to put a net, is going to be somewhere around Mach 18, Mach 20. And designing a net that could actually survive that impact, that's going to be a bit of a trick.
What about something like, the idea that came about, and I think it's probably been around since, I'd say probably the 50s, the idea of a solar sail driven orbital platform that would basically eliminate the particles that are in the, well, try to eliminate as many as possible, sort of as it's sweeping around. And I'm hearing interference, and I know people are hearing this as they're listening to your show. So, okay. I want to mention this real quick. It sounds to me almost like a coded, sort of, ham radio transmission, a shortwave kind of a skip or something like that. It could be the
Wi-Fi. The phone this is a new phone. It's located next to my Wi-Fi. Well, not next to it. It's about 2 feet away from my Wi-Fi router. But I've had some people already email on in and say it sounds like the Wi-Fi router's polling signal to see if there are any devices in the area that it can link to. And so obviously after the show today, I'm going to have to relocate the phone to someplace else. But again, I'm hoping we're going to solve the broadband problem, and I'm not going to have to do the show on the radio anymore, on the telephone anymore.
On the telephone, yeah. That's. I mean, I'm really
getting on back to your solar sail. Getting on back to your solar sail idea. The problem with the solar sail is once you built it, obviously you can go anywhere in the solar system for no fuel cost whatsoever. But it's very slow because of how tenuous the solar wind actually is. So getting this thing to be able to maneuver from orbit to orbit to sweep up the space junk is going to take years and years. And again, you're dealing with a very fragile structure, which is going to be easily punctured by objects in higher inclination orbits. Right.
Well, I was thinking the same thing as you just as you said that. I thought, as I said, about the solar sail, seeing as a standard sail of any boat can be punctured by, well, generally they're pretty tough, but they can be punctured by flying debris of some kind as well. So, but when it's going Mach 18, as you said, of course, it represents no barrier whatsoever. So, anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I thought, the idea, okay, there was a movie, and you probably saw it, I'm sure you did, called WALL-E. You remember the Earth was
I loved it.
Encased in a brown cloud. Okay. Are you saying we're anywhere near the encasement of a brown cloud? I hope not.
Well, we're not there yet, but if this idea that we're going to carry the war into space moves forward, we very well could be. Because when you're down here on Earth, if you shoot down a warplane, it crashes to the ground, that's the end of it. But if you blow up a satellite in orbit, much of that debris just goes into other orbits, and it can then threaten other satellites, destroying them and sending their debris into new orbits, and you could have a cascade effect. So far, to my best of my recollection, there's only one documented case of two satellites actually hitting each other. But there have been several cases of debris from something, falling off a satellite or something, causing damage to the ISS and the space shuttle. And again, it was a very tiny fragment. In the case of the space shuttle, it was literally a fragment of paint, but it hit at almost a right angle, and that's why it had the kinetic energy to do the damage it did.
Right. Now, okay, one other quick question as far as flying. I forgot my question. I started thinking about what you were saying. Anyway, well, thanks for taking my call. I appreciate it, and I'll probably think of my question as soon as I hang up. So, okay. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and we're going to switch over to Steve. And Steve, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Mike, I don't believe for one moment your little problem with your internet with Spectrum is just coincidental. I don't believe that for one bit, because you release so much information out there that's really, really, really good information for RVN listeners. But my question to you is, I actually talking about the vaccine issue. RVN had a banner article a couple days ago about an employee being fired. And then today I did my little search and found 50 employees in that area that were fired for refusing the flu vaccine. And I did a little call over to the Minnesota Nurses Union and had a little chat with one of their talking heads. And I'm going to discuss what my conversation was with that individual. No names released, but on Sunday on my show on Off the Beaten Path on Sunday 2 to 4 p.m. But it was not pretty, and I am very concerned. I am still in the healthcare profession, and I am very concerned that even the nurses' unions are not fighting hard enough for to stop these mandatory vaccinations. So I was very discouraged when I talked to this individual about, and it was not a good conversation. It ended abruptly, and I'm going to talk about that on my show on Sunday. But I don't know, Mike. I think it's going to come down to a civil disobedience that healthcare professionals are just going to have to say, cross their arms and say no. We're going to have to walk off the jobs. We're going to have to just say that's the way it is. We need to take ownership again of our lives. And if we do not do so, you can bet there'll be one vaccine after another thrown at you and saying, we own you, and you're employed, and therefore we own you. If you want to keep working, you have to keep taking these vaccines, and I'm going to be hot on this issue in the next couple of months. I know the flu vaccine is being pushed really hard right now, and I'm going to be hitting this issue really hard on my show, big time.
Well, good. I mean, it's an issue that is important to everybody who values their health. And again, referring back to the article we had a little earlier in the show, just looking at the statistics for settlements for vaccine injury, that flu vaccine is the most dangerous one out there. And apparently they're still having a problem with this Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is permanent. Once you get it, that's it. That's pretty much the end of your life right there in terms of being productive. You're going to deal with that for the rest of your life. But again, we have seen our society devolve to a situation in which these pharmaceutical companies are rushing these products out to make as much money as they can. And when they're dangerous, they just hire public relations firms to go on out and say it's, ridiculous tinfoil hat conspiracy stuff. The problem with most medical professionals is they're caught up in the belief system. Their self-image is very much, we're here to heal, we're here to take care of people, and you even suggest the possibility that something they're doing to their patients is causing harm, you're going to get a very strong reaction. And Claire and I went through that with a friend we used to have a while ago, who we sort of held her hand through her husband's suicide, and then one day we got into the conversation of vaccines. She was a medical professional and was like, wow, she just transformed right in front of our eyes and just got so totally defensive about what was going on. So when you have the medical practitioners are literally enslaved by their belief that what they're doing is good, it's going to take a lot of evidence to really convince them. And as long as the pharmaceutical industries and the government and the media are saying, yeah, this is all okay, they're going to choose to believe that. They're not going to want to look at the evidence that something may have gone horribly wrong.
Well, like I said, my conversation was very, very short. The guy finally, he just bailed on me. He just hung up on me. And I was very, very nice about it, but evidently didn't fight very hard. And the only thing he seemed to care about was adverse reactions, and evidently he doesn't understand what adverse reactions were. But I've seen Guillain-Barré many, many times in the hospital and ICU, and it is very painful. And you are correct when you say that these vaccines can cause this, but the low percentage of effectiveness on this vaccine, this flu vaccine, year after year, is amazing. That should be your solid case against this vaccine to say, hey, stop this nonsense. But it's not working, and there is a bigger plan in play here. And I will be talking about that a little bit on my show, like I said, on Sunday, Off the Beaten Path, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So anybody interested, please tune in. We'll talk about this issue.
Okay, now you heard the story about the culturing the flu vaccine, flu virus rather, in eggs, causing it to mutate. Yeah, because that appears to be the reason why the flu vaccine is so ineffective year after year after year.
Right. Yeah,
so here we have.
They only seem to care, Mike, about people. They were giving an exemption. Actually, Monday was the deadline in Minnesota for medical exemptions. But then, we see these physicians that are being forced to not give their letters for medical exemptions, or they lose their medical license through the board. This is a serious problem.
Yes,
this is serious. That a physician who actually says, "Well, this person should be exempt from this vaccine," if he gives the letter, he will lose his license.
Okay, Steve, we got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with more phone calls after these few words. Show here, and we're going to go right back to the telephones. Francis in North Carolina, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind today?
Hello, aloha to you both.
Aloha Snack Bar.
Okay, Snack Bar too. What can I tell you? Just a couple of quick thoughts other than what I originally called about. One, I will gladly wear my designer tinfoil hat. Thank you very much.
Okay.
That being said, when you had the issue about the internet service or cable service, whatever name you want to call it, Spectrum or who knows what, I really get a kick out of it when they call you up and leave a message that, according to our service records, your modem is no longer functioning the way it should to receive the high-speed internet service that it should be using. And I'm thinking, excuse me, but there's nothing wrong with it so far, so why should I change it? So, enough about that mess. So we haven't had it changed. Lastly,
well, one of the things you need to be aware of is these companies are bundling the deals of cable TV and internet and everything, and they're providing all these services. But people are starting to basically cancel their cable TV subscriptions. They simply can't afford it. They're tired of nothing but lies coming from the corporate media, or they're tired of all the endless reruns. It's just the same stuff over and over again. And how many times can you watch the boring tedium and still get excited about it? So they're trying to basically build up their revenues by pushing more advanced services. And I'm sure that at some point I'm going to get a call from Spectrum saying, well, if you upgrade to the new Wizzo class, we will guarantee so much bandwidth up and down. Well, okay, I'm sorry, but you already guaranteed me 300 megabits per second. I'm not getting that, so why should I upgrade and get lied to again?
It's not advanced as they make it out to be or claim it is. It's a joke, it's a lie, it's a fraud, for that matter. As for the microbe thing being earthbound originally and then ends up out in space or who knows what, wherever it was discovered at, as far as the ISS station is concerned, they can do that testing of such a microbe there at the space station, because after all, it is a science lab in which the whole reason why they have that up there, other than communication between nations and all that, as far as scientists go, is to examine various elements or life forms or whatever have you, to see what is unique about them and how they can learn about them, let alone are they helpful to humanity, or is it helpful to humanity in the light of what planetary body or asteroid or whatever they came from, and how they have evolved to that point.
Francis, the problem with that is the ISS was never set up to be looking at exobiology. They did not expect that they were ever going to encounter something that would require that kind of equipment. And some of the equipment that they're going to need to tear this little bug apart is very, very heavy and expensive to get into orbit. Things like gene sequencers and so forth. So I imagine they did the best they could with the materials they had on board the ISS, but definitely on the assumption that it is benign and safe, bringing it to Earth gives them a lot more options in terms of figuring out what it's doing. Anyway, Francis, we're going to have to let you go and do a station identification. Back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Kevin in West Virginia. Kevin, thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, how are you today?
Well, I'm dealing with all this hardware issues here, and after the show, I'm going to rip this all apart and see if I can't reconfigure it.
Your caller, Steve, I had called in and talked to you about the infrastructure, but your caller, Steve, the guy with the vaccines, got my gears turning inside my head. I have what's called retinitis pigmentosa, and I don't know if you know what that is or not, but I'm losing my eyesight. And they tell me it's genetic, but I don't buy it's genetic. I kind of believe it's vaccine related. And I wondered if you ever ran across a study with vaccines and possible blindness. Wondered if you or him or if anybody, because the more I research this, the more upset I get, and it's kind of hard for me to singly research it with a level head. But enough about me, about the infrastructure. Man, instead of us building bombs, why don't we fix our roads, fix our internet, fix what's going on in this country instead of being a war economy? I understand war sells and war makes money, but you need to have your constituency of your country to be happy to be able to want to go to war. I mean, this is a joke.
Well, you're absolutely right here, and of course, if you remember back to that document that General Wesley Clark leaked out back in, I think it was 2005, the wars were supposed to be over by 2008. And so obviously it's way off schedule. We're all suffering with a wartime economy. And the reason the U.S. government chose to go to war was to drag the world back to dependence on the U.S. dollar for all cross-border trade and banking, because that's about the only way that we still have new wealth coming into the U.S. economic system. Our manufacturing has declined terribly over the last 3 decades. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture. We have nothing to offer the world. So the idea is we're going to go on out and force the world to go back to Bretton Woods, and we'll make our economy function by siphoning wealth off of other people's economies.
Okay, well, Francis, the problem with that is, I don't believe it's vaccine related. And I wondered if you ever ran across a study with vaccines and possible blindness. You know, if wondered if you or him or if anybody, because the more I research this, the more upset I get, and it's kind of hard for me to singly research it with a level head. I totally agree. And I wonder if your hardware issues or the issues that you're having, does this have anything to do with this so-called net neutrality? I don't quite understand all of net neutrality, except for socialism on the internet. It's kind of what I understand it as for the ISP and the censorship of the content. But I wonder if that's the issue that you're having is this net neutrality issue. I wonder if you're being affected by it.
Well, if it's me, it's not just me, because if you go over to downdetector.com and you read the page on Skype, there are complaints from all over the country. They actually have an outage map, and it's covering pretty much all of the continental United States. So they definitely have issues trying to integrate all these systems they've bought and getting them to work smoothly. Again, as Stadmiller suggested, these companies are not really spending money on improving and enlarging the infrastructure. They're basically profit-taking, or they're simply harvesting more money to go on out and buy up other smaller ISPs to bring into their growing monopoly. But as far as net neutrality goes, the idea of net neutrality was all ISPs carry all traffic with an equal priority. And it's a concept that came out of the breakup of the Bell Telephone Company into the Baby Bells, where they passed this common carrier regulation saying that the regional telephone companies had to carry traffic that may have originated and even had a destination in other telephone company areas. And it made perfect sense, and it certainly makes sense for the Internet. But the ISPs don't want to be regulated as a public utility. They don't want to be bound by common carrier. They basically want to sell their bandwidth to the highest bidder, and it may be happening here, or it may be happening all across the country. But again, the state of New York successfully sued Spectrum / Comcast / Charter, they keep changing their name, for failing to deliver the bandwidth that was advertised and paid for. And so I think we need to get lawsuits like that going in all 49 states and send a message that we, the American consumer, are tired of being overbilled and underserved by these corporations. And again, they've been lobbying against net neutrality. They want a fast lane for delivery content, and everybody else is going to get shoved into a corner. And if net neutrality, if this isn't what Spectrum is already doing, when net neutrality is officially ended, it's going to get worse.
I was going to ask, do you think being put under the FCC, the Federal Trade Commission, would be a better regulation than making it, like a utility?
Well, all Congress has to do is declare it as a public utility. It's a critical part of our infrastructure. Lives depend on it. And yeah, they could pass laws, but again, the lobbyists for these big ISPs go up to Capitol Hill. They got a bunch of money in their pocket, and they get members of Congress to simply vote away a free and open internet. And that's why I'm applauding Russia for setting up their parallel internet. And if it ever becomes available here in Hawaii, I'm certainly going to sign up for it, because I'm really sick and tired of this situation with Spectrum.
Absolutely, and I believe there's enough smart Americans out there to set up a parallel Wi-Fi system or a parallel internet infrastructure. I believe we can do it without, setting up our own systems, without relying on government. As Reagan said, government is the problem. I hope you have a wonderful day, and hope you get your hardware issues fixed, because I love listening to your show, and when it sucks like this, it's hard for me to listen to it, but I hope everything gets better for you. I know it's hard for me to deal with. I did a quick search for your retinitis pigmentosa, and I didn't find any links to aluminum specifically. But I will take a look for any links to vaccine. But you're probably going to want to call into Steve Elkin's show because he definitely knows more about this than I do. Can I be, whenever you hang up with me, can I give, Mr. Mike or Mr. Rob, whichever one's in the room, my, contact information? I have no computer right now, and I can only use a phone, but I wonder if he would be able to contact me.
Okay, well, yeah, if, Mike, if you could pick up on Kevin and, get a phone number, from him to give to Steve, that would really be a tremendous help. And, if we could at the same time switch over to Tim in Wyoming, Aloha, Tim. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind? You take care, Kevin. Tim's gone. Okay, that's fine. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So let's get back to human-caused global warming, which is yet another in a long series of major scams played on ordinary people by corporate media, corrupted scientists, greedy politicians, like Al Gore. Al Gore, when that 2000 Florida election debacle ended, he was almost broke. And now he's a multi-millionaire, bought a new mansion out on the coast of California, so much for sea levels rising. It's all about money. It's all about money. So there's this article out of Natural News. 30 years of fear-mongering and global warming still hasn't destroyed the planet. And before I get into the specifics here, you need to remember back in the 1970s, these same people screaming about global warming were talking about the coming ice age. So they just flip back and forth from one big scare to another to get you to buy products or to get you to support what they're doing, or just to build audience numbers for sensationalist TV shows. Killer Bees, Y2K, things like that. So basically, we've had 30 years of fear-mongering on human-caused global warming, and they've come out with all these amazing, frightening predictions. Earth completely uninhabitable. We're all going to die a miserable death. And none of it happened. And they're still out there saying if we don't stop using fossil fuels entirely, we're destined for a future of doom and gloom. Of course, they don't have a suggestion what we're supposed to use in place of fossil fuels. And they'll say, well, you know, we've got the ethanol. That doesn't come from oil wells or coal mines. Yeah, but it's still carbon. And it still produces carbon dioxide when burned here. So we keep hearing this stuff over and over and over again. 25 years ago, there were 1,700 scientists signed a letter to warn society would collapse if pollution and overpopulation weren't dealt with immediately. And this same group has now issued another warning. And it's hard to take them seriously when you consider how wrong they were the first time around. Remember the Jehovah's Witnesses? Every once in a while, they'd come out with a prediction that the world was going to end on this day. Jesus was going to come down and take us all away on this day. And they got it wrong so many times they quit making predictions. Got a little bit embarrassment there. Remember back in 2009, Prince Charles said we had just 96 months to save the planet from irreversible collapse. And obviously it didn't happen. And apparently, Prince Charles was lobbying lawmakers in Britain to institute policies that would help his own investments in a Bermuda sustainable forestry company. So he was basically just lining his own wallet on that one. Now, apparently a group of world leaders met at the Vatican back in 2014 and basically said we've got just 500 days to avoid climate chaos. Once again, the deadline came and passed. Nothing happened. They're getting it wrong again and again and again. And of course, I get very weirded out when the Vatican comes on out making statements about global warming, because this is, after all, the group that tortured Galileo for saying that the Earth orbits around the sun. So I'm not really impressed with their scientific insight. Now, some of these predictions merely failed to come to fruition. Others actually predicted the opposite of what happened. For example, in 2002, George Monbiot said that within just 10 years, the world would have to choose between using arable farming to feed our planet's animals or using it to feed the people. Doing both would no longer be possible at that point. He was pushing the vegetarian agenda. And by the way, a pure vegetarian diet causes health problems. We evolved to eat different foods, including meat. And you can't just drop it off. Let's see. This was 17 years ago. The UN environmental official Noel Brown said entire nations would be wiped off the planet by rising sea levels. And again, 17 years, no rising sea levels. So it was a scam. by the same people who told you Saddam had nuclear weapons, by the same people who are telling you unemployment is only 4%, by the same people who are telling you that inflation is under control and we're in an economic recovery. Americans are the most lied to people on the face of the earth, and Americans need to recognize that and adjust their perceptions to that. That you are lied to by corporate media, by politicians, by anybody whose price has been met. They get all these scientists to come on out and say, thus and such is happening. Well, that's how they get their funding. You go on out and you announce there's going to be plenty of funding for scientists who can prove human-caused global warming. And you'll immediately get a flood of proposals. Oh, yes, if you give me some of that money, I will prove human-caused global warming is real. It's called the golden rule of science. Whoever has the gold decides the science. And individual scientists are just as corruptible as individual politicians or lawyers or clergy or anybody else. That's why you're supposed to rely on the scientific method and reproducibility of results to basically take human frailty out of the equation. One of the first giveaways that human-caused global warming was a fraud and a hoax was over at the Hadley Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia, which came out with all this data about the world was warming and the hockey stick was proven. And other climatologists said, we'd like to look at your raw data and your methodology because we want to reproduce your results. And Hadley CRU said, oh, well, we had to throw that data away. We ran out of disk room. Just take our word for it. This is our conclusion. That was the first red warning. Something was amiss. Anyway, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Let's get a few more phone calls in here to take out the rest of the hour. And let me do a real quick search here on something. And I'm looking at this retinitis pigmentosa. And apparently it's assumed to be genetic, but they don't really know. They don't really know. And that means there could be something going on that nobody will admit to. It's like this problem with prescription psychiatric medication. We know about the link to extremely violent events because they make the news and they get tracked. But what about lesser effects, fewer effects? We charted a correlation between SSRIs and domestic violence. I'm sure we'd see the same thing with road rage. If you're like me, you've probably noticed over the last several years, people seem to be driving much more aggressively than they ever were before. We could be drugging ourselves into some aberrant, bizarre behavior. We wouldn't know about it. Anyway, getting on back to the Ring of Fire. Apparently, there's a long, dormant earthquake fault line that is showing signs of coming back to activity, and the concern is that it has the potential for a 9.0 magnitude earthquake. And as you are probably already aware, the Ring of Fire that goes around the Pacific Basin, the edge of that tectonic plate, has been very active of late, with lots of volcanoes and lots of earthquakes, and people are very, very nervous about that. Because again, going back to looking at the remains of Mount St. Helens, Mother Nature is just incredibly powerful when she gets into that mode, I guess you could call it here. We've also been down to the Big Island to see the volcanoes there. Now, fortunately, Hawaii's volcanoes are very low-key. They're very relaxed and laid back, and that's why they made a national park around it. And if you ever get out here to Hawaii, I do strongly recommend that you make the trip down to the Big Island. But, a couple of common sense things. Closed-toed shoes, lots of water. It is very warm there. I'm sure you can guess why. And if you're going to stay after dark to see the lava, you want a flashlight. And please, 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 when you see these little sawhorses set up with a rope across it and a little sign that says, do not cross this line, it's not there for decoration. And every year we'll have some tourists who will look at it and say, well, it looks just as solid on the other side of the rope as it does here. And they'll step across the rope, punch through the very thin glass, and they're gone. It is an active volcano. Please treat it with the usual respect. Okay, now then, getting on up here. Apparently Kate Middleton's uncle has been sentenced for punching his wife in the face. All of a sudden, the British fondness for the royals seems to be in decline. And there seems like they're more the fodder for tabloid coverage than they are the ceremonial functions of the royal family. Now, CNN is out there asking whether Trump can tell what is real and what is fake. There's a certain degree of irony in that, I think. Given that just the other day CNN wanted to ban the term fake news because they're tired of people walking through the background of their location interviews and screaming CNN is fake news. That one blew up in their face. So, this is a good one. Apparently an arrest went wrong. A U.S. cop accidentally tasered his fellow officer. That's a lot of fun. And apparently, this is kind of interesting. A cancer researcher, this is over in Natural Blaze, cancer researcher found dead in a New York hospital bathroom. And apparently, they're saying it was a fatal drug overdose due to items they found on his person. But the reason we should pay attention to this guy was 40 years old, and maybe he was doing drugs. But we know that a lot of medical people who were challenging the orthodoxy of the medical industrial complex have died under very strange circumstances. Microbiologists, people who were looking into nagalase and why that was in vaccines when it has absolutely no therapeutic benefit whatsoever, and in fact inhibits the body's ability to fight cancer. We're going to take a break for commercials. Do call on in, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we just got an update on the bacteria found on the outside of the ISS. This is coming from National Geographic, saying it's much more likely the bacteria came from the astronauts themselves. And they're bacteria that hitched a ride on humans. And of course, there's always the issue of contamination. They have this comment in here in this article, which is from inverse.com. They say, of course, NASA understands this risk of contamination, which is why they sterilize all their probes. That is not entirely true. And one of the ramifications coming out of Viking and that kerfuffle over whether the labeled release experiment had actually found life or not, Viking was sterilized. The aeroshell around it literally was built as an autoclave. And they sterilized the entire spacecraft. They gave it a good cooking. And that was one of the things that had to constrain some of the engineering. They didn't want to have any liquid lubricants that could serve as a growth medium. The only exception was the pitching mirrors on the cameras. They couldn't get a solid lubricant that would work for that. But it was sterilized because they didn't want to run that risk of the labeled release experiment picking up something and confusing the results. Unfortunately, because NASA declared that the labeled release experiment had not found life, they weren't as careful about sterilizing subsequent Martian probes and rovers. And so if life is confirmed to be on Mars by Curiosity or a later mission, and there are some new ones getting ready to go up there, there's going to have to be the added step of making sure that this isn't something that transplanted from the Earth on the spacecraft and then mutated in the Martian environment. Now, as far as spacecraft that aren't intended to land on another body, those don't have to be sterilized. Obviously, they're going to be very, very clean. You don't want a bunch of dust and stuff floating around in there. But it's inaccurate to say that NASA sterilizes all their probes. They do some of them, but they didn't do all of them because of that decision. I need to get Gilbert Levin back on the show here again. So, apparently, Hawaii police apparently are now ordering medical marijuana users to surrender their guns and ammunition. Now that strikes me as kind of bizarre because the marijuana users are the least likely to be violent. Nobody gets violent on marijuana. They get violent on meth. They get violent on, any kind of an upper. But marijuana mellows you out. You're probably much less a danger to others than yourself. But apparently any excuse to start grabbing the guns. And I'm rather surprised that's going on here in Hawaii, where the marijuana industry is a major underground part of our agricultural industry. But they do allow medical marijuana here. You can get a little card. But again, to get that card, you have to surrender your guns and ammunition. Seems like a very poor linkage to me. But as I said much earlier in the show, we're seeing an attack on our Bill of Rights. Bit by bit, they're chipping away at the Fourth Amendment right to privacy, the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, the Fifth Amendment right against the government using your equipment without just compensation, which they're doing all the time, using your computers to spy on you. We're seeing all these limits being put on the Second Amendment, and we're starting to see a warm-up literally to try and get limits on the First Amendment. So our country is being stolen from us bit by bit. We're turning into something very, very ugly. And one of the reasons I keep saying that I foresee a Soviet Union-style collapse in the future for this government is because they have become so much like the Soviet Union already in terms of repressiveness, forced science. Science is politics rather than science. And very often I've equated the global warming hoax with Lysenkoism, which, for those of you who don't remember, there was this scientist Lysenko who was a favorite of Stalin's, and he was lauded in the media as this genius who said that if you would force wheat to germinate early in the year, then subsequent crops would inherit that trait. And Stalin ordered Soviet farmers to do that, and the second growing season, nothing happened. And it was the reason there were these massive famines going on in the Soviet Union, which ultimately led to the Soviet Union actually having to buy grain from the United States of America. It was this big deal about these two enemies trading grain. Of course, Russia wouldn't buy grain from the United States now because of the GMO. They absolutely are opposed to GMO. And that's why the GMO companies are trying so hard. And again, in a way, this is an attack on the First Amendment. They want to ban companies from labeling their products as either containing GMO or not containing GMO. You are not allowed to know what the supermarket is giving you to eat for dinner tonight. We're going to take another break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Getting on back to domestic politics here. Latest poll is indicating 59% of Americans think Bill Clinton is a sexual predator. And apparently one of his former White House staffers is out there making the comment that people were actually afraid to, or at least women were afraid to bend over and pick things up off the floor. Now, I think that's meant as a joke, but apparently that was just how intense the situation seemed to be. Meanwhile, over in Alabama, Roy Moore is 6 points ahead over his liberal Democrat opponent, Doug Jones. And Doug Jones, of course, for some reason has got the money to outspend Roy Moore 10-1 for media advertising. Now, Roger Waters was supposed to be going to be doing concerts in Germany. And apparently German public broadcasters have dropped the plans to air the concerts, citing what they call accusations of anti-Semitism against him, because Roger Waters is a supporter of BDS and Palestinian rights. And he's a member of BDS, and so apparently he has decided that he will go to Palestine, or try to get to Palestine, for Christmas and throw a concert there for the Palestinians. which would be a wonderful thing to do. But I have a hunch that Israel may simply refuse to let him through. Remember when the UN delegation and then the EU delegation tried to get to Palestine, and Israel said, no, can't go in. Now, over in The Hague, at the International Criminal Tribunal, there's been this trial of this Bosnian war chief, guilty of war crimes, Slobodan Praljak, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and he filed an appeal. The appeal was turned down, and as soon as that decision was read, he basically had a bottle of poison hidden on his person, and he screamed, "I'm not a war criminal," and then he drank the poison and died right on the spot. Now, we've been talking again about all this very sensitive information that is being leaked out on these public servers. And apparently a classified toolkit for potentially accessing U.S. military intelligence networks was left exposed to the public internet for anyone to find, according to security researchers today. And what this is, it's a Linux-based virtual machine designed to safely receive and handle secret material and connect to protected Pentagon computers. And it was discovered in a misconfigured cloud storage service. Anyone with an Amazon Web Service account could have found and gotten into this unsecured AWS S3 silo and pulled the U.S. government software files. So there's a high degree of recklessness going on there, and the cloud has turned out to be this incredibly bad idea. And what they're trying to do is to get away from the idea of you having your own computer and you having your own data under your control. They want to take the world of computing back to the model of the 1970s, where all you have in your home is a terminal, and you will dial up some corporate-owned mainframe on which the actual software and data resides. And this obviously will be marketed as a service. You will pay for this. And it also allows nefarious inspection of the contents of your data. Because the idea that it's being encrypted is utterly ridiculous. The NSA is not going to allow that to happen. And I remember those old days of acoustically coupled modems and terminals when I was working at Robert Abel & Associates. I had a VT52. And a little modem, you'd shove the phone into it, and I could dial up the computers at Robert Abel and check on the process of my renders, which I thought was really cool. And then I could go on out and explore the emerging internet, UUCP, email, FTP, remote logins, and so forth. But I do like having my own computer hardware, and I like having my data under my control. And we've had so many problems with cloud servers where data just gets wiped out, and now we're beginning to realize that they are an amazing security problem. Nobody can seem to secure them. This is not the first time we've had this story of classified information or cyber weapon tools just being exposed on an Amazon cloud server, where people are just able to look at it, copy it off at will. Along with the state of computer hardware and software, the state of computer security in this day and age is abysmal. It's absolutely abysmal. And again, maybe somebody came on in and said, well, if you buy our Wizzo security software, you'll be safe from the cyber criminals. And people just start believing that, and they get lazy, and they're not paying attention to what's going on. And I can admit it's an overwhelming amount of work to try and keep your system secure when cybercrime is running completely out of control, and unless it is some large corporations or government's computers being hacked into, the government's just not interested. You know, go ahead, let the cyber criminals run rampant among the population. They'll be forced to buy security software, and that's good for the economy. All right, we're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Ramsey in Canada. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, sir. How are you?
Ramsey, there you are.
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
You see, sir, I just have one question. In the last couple of days, people have been talking on the network about a program called the documentary, like 6 hours long, or called "The Greatest Story Never Told."
Yes.
Have you seen that? And what do you make of that?
Well, basically the idea is it's an attempt to correct the historical record, because again, knowing how much we're being lied to by corporate media and the government today, it stands to reason that we need to go back and look at everything we've ever been told by the public schools, by the corporate media, by entertainment, by our politicians, and look for it. Now, we know that when a country is going to go to war, they're going to demonize the enemy, dehumanize them. They're going to try and make the leaders of the country look like horrible, evil people who deserve to be killed, and that's part of the process of manufacturing consent among the populace to go to war. But again, so many times it turns out to be lies. We saw that with Saddam and his nuclear weapons. And at the time that was going on down, they were making all these stories about how Saddam, loved to kill his own animals to butcher for his meal, which sounds like a survivalist to me, and it's not really a bad thing. But to the more liberal mindset, he's being cruel to animals. And again, with Assad gassing his own people, which never really made any sense. So at this point, we know that much of the Orthodox history of World War II was manufactured for political gain. And it is important, not so much to correct the record, but to just come to understand how much we are lied to get us to go along with wars of conquest by our government. And so, yeah, this greatest story never told. What?
Teacher, I understand all that, like that we're being lied to, and there are a lot of historical inaccuracies and all that. But teacher, like, what do you think of the documentary itself? Like, do you think it's accurate? Do you think it's inaccurate? Like, what do you think of the history that's presented in that documentary?
Well, I think it's probably some of it is accurate and some of it's inaccurate. The problem with going back that far in history is the documents you find, you're never really sure if they're fake or not. But if you look hard enough, very often you'll find documents that don't support the official story and have not been destroyed. So again, I don't want to declare that it's all completely true or all completely false. There's probably a balance in there, and I leave it up to other analysts to try and deal with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much, Aaron. I'm sorry I was distracted. I was dealing with something about in our control room. Apparently, that machine gunning noise stopped about 20 seconds ago. Again, this is a brand new phone and a brand new headset, so I don't understand why it's picking up this noise. The last phone certainly did not. But I'm again, after the show today, I'm ripping this all apart. I'm going to try and reconfigure it and solve that problem as much as possible. Again, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, Barack Obama, apparently playing catch-up with Donald Trump, has embarked on a 5-day trip to China, India, and France. And he's going to meet with Chinese leader Xi Jinping and Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, before speaking at the introductory session of the Le Napoleon Summit in Paris. He's still trying to pretend that he's the president. Most presidents, when they step down, they just quietly go away, and they like Jimmy Carter, builds homes for poor people. That was it. Obama's still out there trying to play that he's a senior global statesman. It's very alarming. Now, story coming out of Sputnik News. Activists from the Sud Education 93 Teachers Union are preparing to hold educational training which white French residents will be excluded from attending to discuss the problem of racism at the state level. Let me paraphrase that to you again. These people from this teachers union are going to hold a training session on racism to which white people are not allowed to show up. Little bit of irony there. And they're calling it racism in reverse. I take issue with that. Racism in reverse is a phrase that makes it sound like it's not as serious, that it's not as bad. that is maybe justified because it's going into reverse. Racism is racism is racism. And you don't end racism by being racist. All you do is you fan the flames of anger and resentment even more. If you want to end racism, you do it very simply. You stop being racist. You don't hold these little events saying white people are not allowed. That is a racist position. And it almost seems like we're in this weird situation where it's okay to be discriminatory against white people. Just you better not do it to blacks or Hispanics or Asians. You can't do it to them. You know, when blacks take pride in their heritage, it's called black pride. When Hispanics take pride in their heritage, it's Hispanic pride. For some reason, when white people take pride in their heritage, it's hate, it's racism. And white people, as a subset of our culture, do seem to be under attack right now. We had that story about that nurse in Indiana the other day who was out there saying that male babies ought to be killed at birth, for which she was fired, and justly so. But who's fanning this up? Who's fanning up all this anger and hate toward white people? I know Antifa is, and Black Lives Matter is. It's just amazing what's going on here. Okay. As you know, it's Christmas time. And over in Germany, there is a supermarket chain called Penny that, along with the more traditional chocolate Santas and reindeer, has a Santa Claus in rainbow colors to show their support for the LGBT community. And I'm one of those old-fashioned guys. Knowing that there's a Mrs. Claus, I seriously doubt that Santa is gay. Talk about cultural appropriation. I mean, isn't this it? They're taking Santa Claus and they're putting him in rainbow colors. That's cultural appropriation. But apparently that cultural appropriation is good, and wearing a sombrero is bad. Which is kind of ridiculous here. Apparently, Mandela, who's the grandson of Nelson Mandela, is calling on the government of South Africa to support the Palestinian struggle, just like his grandfather, Nelson Mandela, did as president in South Africa. And there are a lot of similarities. And the South Africans who know apartheid have looked at Israel and say, yes, it is an apartheid state. There is no question it's an apartheid state. And so Mandela is saying it's time for the South African government to possibly be a little more proactive. Now, this is going to be a major change because the former apartheid government of South Africa were buddy-buddy with Israel. Israel was helping them develop a nuclear arsenal. At one point, Israel tried to sell them a nuclear weapon, an activity prohibited by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Israel has never signed. But the new South Africa, they seem to be maintaining this commitment to the idea that apartheid is wrong, apartheid is bad, and it should be opposed here. Okay, now, Judicial Watch is out there dropping hints about these Clinton Lynch tarmac documents that are about to come on out. And Tom Fitton is out there saying the cover-up begins to end. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, back on June 29th of last year, Obama's Attorney General Loretta Lynch tried to convince us that the impromptu meeting between herself and Bill Clinton at the Phoenix airport, a private meeting which lasted 30 minutes on Lynch's private plane, was mostly a social meeting in which Bill talked about his grandchildren and his golf game. It was not under any circumstances related to the statement that former FBI Director James Comey made just 6 days later, clearing Hillary Clinton of any alleged crimes related to his agency's investigation. Now, to be accurate, James Comey did not clear her. He merely said, we choose not to prosecute. And he went down that laundry list of felony violations of Title 18. So it may be the tarmac meeting was where Bill Clinton came on into Loretta Lynch and said, you've got to protect Hillary Clinton. or that whole narcocracy is going to blow up in all of our faces, and everybody inside the Beltway, almost everybody, is dirty with that gun and drug running money. That's what they're really protecting. They're not really interested in protecting Hillary Clinton. They're interested in protecting how the Clintons rose to such power and wealth, and who else was involved with it. We're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words from our sponsors. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. And got an update on that glitch for American Airlines. Apparently, their computer system allowed all their pilots, 15,000 flights have been affected by this, but allowed all their pilots to take vacation over the holidays. To err is human, to really mess things up takes a computer. Now, we've all talked about the problem of civil forfeiture, which was originally designed to allow the police to seize the wealth of real criminals, and in order to use that wealth to support more crime-fighting activity. Didn't work out that way. Innocent people are being looted and plundered. And so we're looking at this story from Suffolk County. And it begins back in 2010 with Frank Rinelli, the owner of Far Computers in Ensley, Alabama. And Rinelli, who had owned his own business for more than 2 decades, was just doing some paperwork, and all of a sudden, the cops crash on in. They declare everything in the room to be stolen property, and they confiscated 130 computers, most of which were customers' units waiting to be repaired, along with the company's business servers and workstations, receipts, and checkbooks. Now, nothing ever came of this. There was no proof that any of the material was stolen. Frank never got his day in court. And 7 years later, he is still unable to get his property back from the police. So, dovetailing with that, according to records obtained by Newsday from Suffolk County Comptroller John Kennedy, the former DA, Thomas Spoda, doled out $3.25 million in bonuses to public prosecutors from the pool of seized assets. All right, we're going to take a phone call here. Sherry in Fredericksburg. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I'm really mad about something, and I wanted to get a chance to say something before you went off the air. Obama's representing who over there? He went to see China's leader, right? I mean, who's he representing?
He certainly does not have an official capacity for the U.S. government. Apparently,
was he invited?
Whatever's being discussed.
Can we know what
he was invited or he inserted himself in, and I can imagine Xi Jinping would not refuse a request for a visit from the former president. That would be diplomatically awkward.
No, but how can we be sure that it won't involve treason? He won't betray something. See, I was so happy when Obama had a chance to go talk to them, because I said he's got to get over there and talk to them, or we're not listening to everything. He can't talk here because surveillance everything he says. I'm going to have to let you go. It's too close to, I want to know what he's talking about, and I want to make sure he's not doing anything to overthrow anything the president might have discussed with him privately. You know, there could be treason. He could, we got to know what he's talking. Is this, I mean, it's not just a vacation that he just decided to go visit.
He could, if he's doing any kind of negotiating, with these foreign governments, he's in violation of the Logan Act.
That's good.
Because it's illegal for private citizens to carry out, to influence foreign policy. Anyway, there's the music. I gotta let you go.
Okay, right, thanks.
I need to start ripping this whole setup apart and see if I can find a way around these problems. We'll be back tomorrow here on Republic Broadcasting. Do stay tuned for John Stedmiller. He's got a lot of interesting things to share with you. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.